Welcome to DIYeasycrafts and Berg Knifemaking.com. Today we're going to take a look at how to make this Halloween themed cleaver. This is part 2, mounting the custom Mad Max knife handle or scales. So this is the finished product. This is a Halloween cleaver that I made from one of my standard 1095 cleaver blanks. I was contacted by Joseph at Mad Max Custom Knife Handles. He wanted to do a project together, and this is what we came up with. So in part 1, I basically built the blade and did the blade etching. In part 2, we're going to now mount these beautiful custom knife handles that Joseph at Mad Max Knife made up for this project. These are a paper micarta type product. They're layers of paper, all with the same printing on them. So he can print up almost any type of knife handles for any type of project with your own design on it. And as you cut and grind it, it will have that image throughout the thickness of the material. I started just by gluing up some liners. In this case, I went with a yellow liner. I just thought it made it pop a little bit better. I'm going to finish the front of the handles first. If you think about it, once you attach the handles to the knife, it would be very difficult to shape or polish that particular surface. I do this on an 80 grit belt, and then I'll take it to a 120, and then I'll sand it just with an oscillating sander, 400, 1000, and 2000, and then I hit it on the buffing wheel just for a couple seconds. The process doesn't take a long time, but it does give a nice polished look on that front surface. Now I have to say I worked with Mad Max knife handles in the past when he first started to make them. These are substantially better than the original ones were. With any paper micarta type product, you're going to have some little white occlusions, and now there's hardly any. So I was pretty pleased with them. I glued up one side of the handles first. This is just the process that I use. I clamp them exactly where I want them. I use a 2-part epoxy, and then I'll end up putting 3 clamps on those and letting them dry. Before I walk away, I clean up whatever epoxy is squeezed out between the handle and the blade. I do that with a paper towel as well as an alcohol wipe. The alcohol wipe really gets off that epoxy nicely. And then if your fingers, got any epoxy on them and you touch the blade, you can also clean up the blade with that same alcohol wipe. I'm then going to use the holes that are through the blank as my drill guide. And I'm going to drill 2 1/4-inch holes, or holes for 1/4-inch pins. I actually use a size F drill bit, which is 1 size up from a 1/4. And note that my drill press has a clamp on it to prevent that blade from spinning. And I also have a backing plate that prevents any blowout when you're drilling the holes. Once I've got the holes drilled through the first side, I will glue both halves and glue together the second side of the handles. I'm just going to repeat the same process. I'm going to visually line them up as perfectly as I can get them and clamp them together. I'm going to again clean up whatever epoxy has oozed out between the handle and the blade, and then I'll set that aside to dry. And when that's all done, I'll use the holes that are through the first side as the drill guide and drill holes through the second side. Once I've got the pins glued in place and both of the anything that's protruding ground down, I'll go over to the bandsaw and just trim off as much of the material as possible. I do the majority of the profiling now on a 2x72 belt grinder with either a 60 or an 80 grit belt with a 90-degree table, and I'll do that until the steel of the tang is exposed. Again, nothing here takes an extraordinary amount of time. You just have to have a little bit of patience. Now for the inner curve on the handle, I use the same flat platen, but I let the belt hang over the right side. And that curved belt then allows to get into those curves. This is what you end up with. So the handles are attached, liners are in place, pins are ground down, but that whole handle is sharp. The corners are sharp. So I'm going to go right back onto that 2x72, and very carefully I'm going to round that top corner. Now note I've also got a wet dry vac sucking away the dust from this paper micarta product. And I'm being very careful to visually keep an eye on the blade so that I don't touch the blade to the grinder at all. It is very easy to ruin a blade at this particular point. I'll also use the 2-inch contact wheel at the bottom just to rough grind out that inside curve on the inside of the handle. You don't have to be perfect here. I'm just, removing material. I'll smooth that all out while sanding later on. But again, as I'm working with this material, I can see the improvements that Joseph has made, over the course of the last, I don't know, I guess it's almost 2 years now. I'm going to use a small wheel attachment just to clean up the tang right on the inside of that curve. You can see how that smooths it out real quickly. And now the polishing process. Now I use the standard polishing process that I use for most of my cast resin handles. So I'm going to use an oscillating sander, and I start with a 400 grit. Then I'll go to 800 if I have it. If not, I can skip right to the 1000. And then 2000. And I'll do hand sanding in between. A lot of times I'll end up, completely sanding and polishing a knife handle, and then going back and seeing what little scratches are left and repeating maybe 1 or 2 of the processes. But this is, I sand with a particular grit, then I'll do some hand sanding into those areas that you just can't get at with the oscillating sander, and that your fingers really conform to these handles, so they really make a good way of sanding and getting them to be very comfortable in your hand. One of the final steps in polishing is just to go over to the buffing wheel with a little polishing compound. A very, very light buff brings out a nice shine on these handles. All right, so now that we're done with the handles, and I didn't show it, but I also coated those handles with some automotive wax. It really gives them a nice shine and protects it a little bit. I'm going to add the micro bevel with a 120 grit belt, holding the blade at approximately 20 degrees. And I'm going to do this until I establish a burr along the entire edge of the blade. The process that I use is then to reduce or to change the grit of the belt to a higher grit. So I started at 120, then I go to 240 and 800 and 1000 and 2000. Each time I do, I slow the belt down. I use less pressure so that I'm really just polishing that micro bevel. I'm no longer grinding. So this blue belt is now the 2000 grit belt. I also use a felt backed belt for the final 2000. It just kind of conforms to that bevel a little bit. And then the absolute final step is just to use a leather stroping belt. It just takes a few passes. I just use the 2x72 to hold that belt. I never turn the machine on to use it. And this blade is literally razor sharp. As a knife maker, it's hard to find an area on my arm that has hair anymore, but you can see that you can dry shave very easily with it. So here's a couple images, or this is a video and then a couple images of the finished product. It's got a full blade etching showing a skeleton coming out of the blade holding onto a jack-o'-lantern. It's got beautiful custom knife handles by Mad Max Knife Handles. They can be found on Facebook. I'll put a link in the description below. It's a paper micarta product, and he can print almost anything for you. 1095 high carbon steel blade. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, I ask that you please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this YouTube channel. I would absolutely love it if you took the time to leave me some feedback. Let me know whether what you liked and possibly what you didn't like about what I do or about the videos that I put out. I'd like to give you an invitation to join us on our Facebook group, Knives and Knife Making. And if you are interested in creating your own knives, I invite you to take a look at the book that Jason Northgard and I put out a couple of years ago. It's called Introduction to Knife Making, and that can be found on Amazon.com. Thank you very much.